Hey guys, we're going to wrap up Ephesians this week. We're going to finish up with chapter 6. I hope you'll hang in there with me because we're going to start out. Paul's going to address the home once again. He's going to talk to parents and children. Then he's going to move to the workplace. And then we're going to end on Friday with the realization that those who are in Christ, who are submissive and spirit-filled, that we are at war. We are at war, and so we need the full armor of God. And so hang on in there with me, and let's finish strong. If you're a little bit behind, pick up with us in chapter 6. But today, we are going to start out with parents and children. And I want to ask you a hard question. I thought this was a hard question, but I thought it really went to the root of what we see in the world we live in today. This is what the commentator asked. Think of what would happen to a child who received no instruction and no correction. And he gave the answer himself. He said they would be personally miserable and socially intolerable. And if you work with children anywhere, if you have children in your home, if you're a part of an organization that works with children, if you're an educator, if you work at a preschool, or if you work in the church, in the children's ministry, we see this. It's just a fact. It's just a fact. And so when preachers have said for many years, once the home goes, so goes the nation. We've got to get back to in Christian homes. Once again, Paul is addressing those who are in Christ, and he said this is what wives should do. This is what husbands should do. And now he's going to address the children and parents. We have to go by what God says. So this is what he says in chapter 6, verse 1. He says, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may be well with you and that you may live long on the earth. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and the instruction of the Lord." And so what we see here, it says, children, obey your parents. And so we know practically what that means, that parents should be submissive to the Lord, submissive to each other, serving one another, living according to God's terms. And I love that some of you ladies in your comments last week said that, this is a daily sacrifice, that you have to line back up with what God said as far as the roles in the homes. And so we're going to have to do the same thing as parents and children. But here it says, children, obey your parents in the Lord. That's God's way. That children need instruction. They need training. They need discipline. And we know that this is love, that this is love. And, I know because, my children are adults now, and I do not speak as an expert. Keith and I have not done everything correctly. I'll be the first person to admit it. I remember that some of these times are difficult. Training them when they're younger really helps when they become teenagers and once again, the church's role in that, that you're keeping them under the instruction of the Lord in your home, but also that emphasis that you put on church, the time that you take out to allow the church to come in behind the parents. Once again, it's not the church's job necessarily. It's not primarily. It's the parents' job primarily to help their children grow up in the Lord, but the church has a role in that. So those two things. But I know I didn't do everything right. Keith and I did not do everything right, and sometimes it was hard. But you have to let your yes be yes and your no be no. And I went back in my mind when I was thinking about this, when times were hard when they were teenagers, because that's when it just got a little bit more difficult, because you're having to weigh, can I say yes to this, and should I say no to this? And you realize as a Christian parent that you're saying no a lot more than you're saying yes. But I went back in my mind to a sermon that Brother Ken preached a long time ago, and it was when his kids were still in the home. And I remember he shared that him and Diana had a conversation, and that Diana said to him, we've got to find some places to say yes. And that's true, but we also have to hold on tight to the no's. Because, some things are just a no. And our children are looking at us to see what our priorities are. Do we constantly, as parents, are we constantly realigning with the Lord ourselves? Are we being submissive? But we have to require obedience out of our children. And so, because that's what God says. You know, that verse that he quotes in verse 1 is actually a verse from Proverbs. And so we have to remember that. Then the next thing he says is honor your father and mother. And we know that follows you through all the stages of life. You know, I had to question myself this week, you know, am I honoring my father? And, you know, there were some places where I said I'm not. You know, and so we have to continue to honor our parents because that's what it says. And it says it's hooked to a promise, that there's a promise there. And when it says live long, you know, God defines what long is. And I think it's more important, one commentator said, you know, that you had that quality time with them. You know, maybe your parent didn't live as long as you wanted them to, but that, you know, like when I look back, I know that my mom gave me everything she needed to give. And I just pray now that I honor them in the way that I live, in the way that our children are now as adults. And then he tells the fathers, he said, do not exasperate your children. And, you know, we know what this is, but you are supposed to train and instruct and dig in with them and have conversations and guide them, but don't exasperate them. You know, and one commentator I read, I think it was John MacArthur, was talking about in a Jewish home, there would have been this male domineering figure who really wouldn't have had much interest in listening to the wife or the child. And so Paul's really trying to correct that and say, you know, that fathers, don't exasperate them. Don't push them down so much, but find the areas you need to correct and then find the areas that you need to praise them. And so I know this is hard, but if we could shift this back under the guidelines that God gives us, we would see changes in our homes, in our schools, in our churches, and in our world. So let God define the terms in our homes, and let's seek to obey him every day. I love that some of the ladies last week when we were talking about submission, they said it's every day. It's every day you got to line back up. And, you know, that's what's walking in the Spirit is. Now he's going to move on to the workplace. He says, slaves, be obedient to those who are masters according to the flesh, with fear and trembling in the sincerity of heart as to Christ, not by way of eye service or men pleasers, but as slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart. With good will render service as to the Lord and not to men. That's a good verse to highlight. Knowing that whatever good thing each one does, he will receive back from the Lord, whether slave or free. And masters, do the same things to them and give up threatening, knowing that both the master and yours is in heaven, and there is no partiality with him. And so now he moves, and you know, this, you might not like the terms, but that's what they are, slaves and masters. And that was very much a part of that culture in that time, that there were masters and there were bond servants, there were slaves. And so he says that if you're in Christ and you're in one of those positions, that you're really working for the Lord. So honor the Lord in your work. Consider that you are truly working for the Lord in this. This is once again a picture of submission. And it's submission even when it's difficult, even when it's hard, even when the circumstances are difficult and not what you want. You know, you might not like the menial tasks you're given at work. You might not like sometimes the way you're treated. But it says you can honor the Lord in it. We can honor the Lord in it. And so often I think you need to highlight, what good will render service as to the Lord, not to men? Once again, everything we do is sacred. It's not, you can't separate secular and sacred when you're in Christ. That it's all under the Lord's lordship. So seek to please him. Seek to please him in your workplace. And I love that it says that we see there at the end that there's no real distinction between the secular and the sacred, but it's all done for him. And I love this quote. It says, the most menial servants, you know, if you have the lowest task possible at work, you are not excluded from the choicest blessing in Christ. And so even whether it's in our workplace or in our homes, those menial tasks that you're just pushing through, do that for the Lord and see how he blesses it. See how he blesses it. And so I wanted to tell you that I did my drawing. and that Sharon Milam won the Spurgeon study. But I have to say, it was so popular. I know y'all liked the way it looked, and I'm going to get some more, and I'm going to give away some more because this week we're going to finish up. So hang in there with me. I wrote this little thing about Friday. I said, Paul reminds those who are in Christ to be spirit-filled, submissive, and that they are at war. And he gives them instructions to put on the full armor of God. So don't give up on me. Let's finish strong in chapter 6. Then I'm going to take a break. So while we're taking a break, the next week when we're taking a little break, please invite a lady to join you in John. I'm just going to ask you to do it. It's okay if you don't, but I want you to pray about if there's somebody that you could walk through John with. So I want to encourage us that we have to let God define the terms in our homes as parents, as children, as workers, and as bosses. We all have to be under the lordship of Jesus Christ, and we have to be submissive. We have to honor the Lord in it. We have to honor the Lord in it. So let's let God be God. Let Him define the terms, and let's realign constantly with what He has to say to us.